The S800 is the first Bryton unit that enters my elite tier of certified everyday GPS units. These are the devices that I'd be happy enough to use personally for maybe up to a couple of years. They have the features I value and the fewest deal breakers and annoyances. Oh, and if you're curious, my current certified GPS list is the Garmin Edge 530, Wahoo Element Bolt V2, and the Hammerhead Karoo 2. All bike GPSs have quirks and imperfections, but these are the ones that just do better than the others. So the S800, let's talk about why it's now on that list. I do want to recognize first though that this unit was sent for review, but it's fully independent and I have full editorial control of my videos. Let's get started then with the nice hardware package. The S800 is a slim and sleek unit with a well-sized 3.4-inch touchscreen and USB-C charging port hidden away on the back. Bryton has done an okay job with the touch functionality. It is a little on the laggy side, not as responsive as something like the Karoo 2 though. The buttons and sliders that you have to use on the screen can be a little small in places, which can make changing data fields pretty tricky, especially while you're riding, but you do learn to live with it. On the plus side, it works just fine with full finger gloves, so no more winter rides trapped on a certain screen. Thankfully, Bryton has given us buttons, so you don't have to rely fully on the touch interface, which is kind of my sweet spot for GPS units of having both. My one small gripe with the buttons is that they are clustered together quite closely and have tiny little indicator icons, so I always seem to press the wrong one. The mount on the back is the sort of slightly adapted Garmin style, which means it'll fit some Garmin compatible mounts, but not quite all of them in my experience. The fit is just a little bit different enough for me to warn you not to expect full compatibility or sort of clean fits universally. Bryton's out front sport mount is fine, and the standard stem and rubber O-ring mount is also fine, so no issues there. The S800's package hits a good spot. A solid unit with small imperfections and annoyances, but nothing that really destroys it overall. Now, part of the hardware is an excellent battery life. I did a 4-day bikepacking trip with between 19 and 20 hours of ride time with navigation running, and it only used 75% of the battery. I didn't have to charge it at all during the trip, which is a pretty fantastic result, and one of the best in the big screen GPS category. There is a catch though. The backlight was turned all the way down for all of that time. After getting the unit, I quickly learned that the backlight destroys the battery. With the backlight on 100%, I burned through approximately 15% per hour, making for a 6 to 7 hour battery life. Now, Bryton does claim a total battery life of around 30 hours, which does actually line up with my experiences when I was running it efficiently. And you can argue that it's rarely necessary to run the battery life on 100%, but the screen on the S800 is quite dull and the backlight isn't very strong. So if you want good battery life, you have to turn the light way down or off. If you want good visibility, you have to just sacrifice some of that battery. Moving away from the hardware now to Bryton's app. I've spoken about this in every Bryton review, so I'll keep it brief here. The app is nice. It helps set up the device, sync your activities, and even has a decent visualization system for your post-ride data. The app isn't such a big deal for the S800 because the touchscreen makes setup quicker than a non-touchscreen GPS. It is a nice app overall though, and I wish Garmin would take some inspiration from it. As a post-ride reviewing system though, as much as it does have some value in it, I mean, I'm looking at Strava. That is my post-ride analysis platform of choice. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where yes, it is a valuable part of the ecosystem, but that doesn't mean it'll necessarily be valuable to all users. But I'm certainly glad it's there, and it does make living with the device easier. Okay, maps and navigation now. The core navigation experience of the major brands is pretty close nowadays. Whether Garmin, Wahoo, Hammerhead, or Bryton, they have a broadly similar experience of leading you through a course when you're on the bike. The Bryton gives you a beep warning at 150 meters that sounds like this. And then the turn direction pops up even if you're not on the map screen. It's all pretty standard stuff. The rerouting when you're off course does tend to suggest U-turns a lot and very quickly, whereas I always prefer systems that will guide you back onto the course while keeping you moving forward. In that sense, Bryton reminds me of Garmin's rerouting as opposed to Wahoo's more natural system that gets you back without turning you around. Now, the main difference that I've found between Bryton and the big players is how easy the courses are to get from your planning apps onto your device. So if you've made a route in the connectable third-party services like Strava or Ride with GPS, you have to find it in the Bryton app, convert it to a course with directions within the app, but then you have to export it to the head unit as another step. It also has to sync your connected apps basically every day you go through the process, which adds more time. It's not some big or onerous task, but Wahoo and Hammerhead, for example, just have your starred Strava routes available with no extra work. That's one place where Bryton lags just a little bit behind, and it makes it slower to fire up a route with navigation when you need to. Alright, now the ride experience is usually where the administrative annoyances of GPSs start to disappear and it becomes a part of just riding your bike. And I do enjoy the S800's ride experience. These big screen GPS units are just a little bit nicer with larger data fields and big maps that you can also fit data fields onto. I particularly enjoyed the data fields that show your current data against your average. There's also the climb tracking system that's become very popular. It only works when you're following a course, but it's still handy to get real-time data of how long and steep a climb is or how far through it you are, even how many climbs are remaining for the course you're on. I do feel sometimes that these climbing systems are a proxy for Strava live segments, which the Bryton doesn't have as a feature. As I mentioned, the maps and navigation package is well-rounded with enough detail on the maps to give you a sense of the world around you. There's even street names if you zoom in a little bit closer. I came to appreciate the battery life as well. You can start a 4 to 5 hour ride with only 20% of battery and know you've got enough juice so long as you don't use the backlight. Then when you get home, you can just plug it into USB-C and recharge it easily. It is a nice unit to ride with and pretty easy to live with. This S800 is the best Bryton unit I've used so far, and as I mentioned in the intro, the first Bryton I'd feel content with using as my sole GPS. But that's not to say I'd buy it over the other units that I mentioned. I still think the Garmin Edge 530 and Wahoo Element Bolt V2 are the sweet spot in the market. They have everything you need, but without the sexy hardware package sort of wrapped around it that adds a lot of bloat and a lot of expense. The Bryton is an interesting competitor to the Hammerhead Karoo 2 though, which costs almost exactly the same depending on your local market. The Hammerhead has a more polished user experience, it's slightly nicer across the board, but the Bryton will crush it in battery life and actually has an app that brings value to the ecosystem. It does enough of what the Hammerhead does to be a genuine alternative. If you love not caring about battery life, then the Bryton is definitely the unit for you. In the end, I switch GPS head units constantly, so I get to learn the strengths and weaknesses across the market. For that reason, I'm not a fanboy of anything. All of the units I named as ones that I'd be happy to live with have imperfections. And I hope the videos I make help you to navigate to the unit that does the most of what you need with the fewest annoyances and deal breakers baked into them. Thank you so much for joining me. Maybe the next video I upload after this one will have a little bit more about what's in this box, which I'm pretty excited about. Whew. So keep an eye out for that.